Welcome to Starbound. My name is the Voice Ogre. I'll be your narrator today. But before we get started with the video, let me ask to see if you're subscribed real quick. If you're not, it's fine, but it's free, and it will let you know whenever we post new videos. Thank you. The alien crowd fell silent as Winston the Heavy Johnson stepped into the arena. It was a hulking brute of a man, over 100 kilograms of sculpted muscle. He had black hair and heavy brows and a jaw like a lantern. By human standards, it was imposing. To the aliens of the Tournament of Worlds, he didn't look like much. He was tiny compared to a four-armed Jundari. He had no natural weapons or armor, and the betting pool listed his victory as the longest of odds. The more common bets were on which of the other testants would kill the man. "Are you sure about this?" John Valencia whispered, tugging nervously at his crisp diplomatic uniform. "The other species already think we're weak. If you get your butt kicked out there..." "I won't," Winston assured him, rolling his massive shoulders. The movement sent ripples through his dark brown back. "Most of these guys don't know martial arts, and the few that do don't know jack about boxing." He adjusted the simple white shorts and tank top that were his only gear. The arena rules prohibited armor and weapons. And they certainly don't know about gravity boxing. These fools ain't ready for a man who's been trained at 3 Gs. "Gravity boxing," Coach Drago snorted, the sound somehow conveying both amusement and irritation. "You really couldn't come up with a better name?" The grizzled trainer wore the same rumpled white shirt and red shorts he'd worn everywhere. Between a solid gray mullet and his pot belly, he didn't look like a serious person. But nobody knew boxing like Drago did. "It's a good thing you're a fighter, kid. You'd never make it in advertising." From his elevated announcer's booth, Jomi Hype's voice boomed across the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen and beings of all configurations, welcome to the 147th Grand Tournament of Worlds!" The crowd roared to life, a cacophony of alien sounds that made Valencia wince. "I'm your host with the most, Jomi Hype, and we're here to watch the galaxy's best fight for the title of strongest of all. 100 tournaments across 16 worlds have all led up to this. Now, these fearsome foes will face each other in a final contest to show who is the strongest in all the worlds. And here are the contestants," Jomi Hype continued. "First, we have a newcomer to the Galactic stage." The massive holoscreen above the ring zoomed in on Winston's face. His expression remained impassive, dark eyes scanning the competition as Jomi continued his introduction. "Winston the Heavy Johnson, Earth's heavyweight boxing champion." There was a pause. "He looks kind of soft, doesn't he? But don't let that fool you, folks. Winston the Heavy claims to have been training in high gravity. He's much stronger than he looks." Jomi Hype let a note of worry leak into his voice. "At least I hope he is." A Jundari warrior shouldered past Winston, all four arms flexing demonstratively. "Gavron Bloodbraider will feast on your bones, tiny human," he growled through pointed teeth. "Your species is weak. You should have stayed home." Winston didn't respond, but his lips curved into a slight smile. They waited patiently as Jomi introduced the other 15 fighters. Jomi went out of his way to hype up each one. He'd only sounded dubious about the human. It was annoying, but there was no harm in being underestimated. "First round matchups are now displayed," Jomi announced. The holoscreen shifted to show a tournament bracket. Winston's first opponent would be Sylvis Steel Sting, an insectoid fighter from the Miklik species. It was an ugly thing, short, with 4 legs and a purple exoskeleton. The alien was already in the ring, mandibles clicking as caustic venom dripped from the stinger on his tail. Winston had been warned Sylvis would eat him if he could. "Remember," Coach Drago muttered as Winston moved toward the ring, "he'll try to get close enough to sting you. Keep your distance, work the jab, and wear him down. You've got the reach advantage for once. Use it." Winston nodded, ducking between the ropes with a fluid grace that belied his size. The Miklik warrior's compound eyes tracked his movement, antenna twitching as he assessed his new opponent. The arena's containment field hummed to life around them, protecting the audience from stray venom sprays or blood splatter. "Are both warriors ready?" Jomi's voice held an edge of excitement. When both fighters nodded, he practically shouted, "Then, fight!" Sylvis launched himself forward with shocking speed, stinger poised to strike. Winston was already moving. He pivoted smoothly to the side, letting the alien's charge carry him past. Before Silvis could recover, Winston's left jab snapped out. He caught the Miclac in the thorax with a meaty thunk. The crowd gasped. They'd expected the human to be knocked aside like a toy. Instead, Silvis was staggered back, chitinous armor cracking under the force of the blow. A good heavyweight boxer could deliver almost 1,500 pounds of force. Winston's high-gravity training had more than tripled that. Winston pressed his advantage, stepping in with a right cross that sent the insectoid fighter sprawling. Silvis' steel sting rose shakily, mandibles clicking in agitation. His antenna tracked the human as he settled back into his fighting stance. The crowd had gone from shocked silence to murmurs of confusion. This was not how they expected the fight to go.
Remarkable!
Jomi Hype's voice carried genuine excitement. The human striking power is far beyond what this frame would suggest. This might even be a real fight. The Miclac warrior circled warily now, looking for an opening. Venom dripped from his stinger, sizzling where it hit the arena floor. Winston tracked the movement. When Silvis darted in again, Winston was ready. He threw a probing jab that the insectoid warrior dodged, but it forced him to commit to a direction. Winston's left hook caught Silvis mid-leap, sending him sprawling once more. This time, the Miclac didn't rise immediately. His exoskeleton showed spreading cracks where Winston's punches had landed.
How?
Silvis clicked out, mandibles working furiously.
How did you hit so hard? You don't even have an exoskeleton.
I trained in 3 times my normal gravity, Winston replied, advancing steadily. You want to call it here? No shame in living to fight another day. The alien's response was another lightning-fast charge, but desperation made him sloppy. Winston slipped the stinger strike and countered with a crushing right cross that connected squarely with Silvis's head. The sound of cracking chitin echoed through the arena. Silvis was struggling to stand. His movements were uncoordinated now, suggesting Winston's last blow had rattled his brain. The human boxer kept his guard up, but he didn't press the attack, letting his opponent decide whether to continue.
Your mercy,
Silvis clicked, antenna drooping,
is noted, human. But this is a combat of honor.
He raised his stinger one last time. Mandibles spread in what passed for a Miclac war cry.
I'll still eat you if I can.
Winston's lips quirked, but he gave a respectful nod. Well, bring it then. When Silvis charged, the human met him head-on. A right cross, left hook, and a right hook caught the alien mid-leap, swatting him out of the air. Silvis hit the ground and didn't move. The arena's medical drones swarmed in immediately, scanning his vital organs. Oh, the Miclac warrior is unconscious but stable, Jomi announced after a tense moment. Victory goes to Winston the Heavy Johnson! The human advances to the next round. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Cheers and boos mingled with sounds Winston's translator couldn't even interpret. He ignored them all, walking to where Silvis was being loaded onto a medical transport. The Miclac's eyes flickered as Winston approached. Good fight, Winston said simply. Heal up good? Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
I don't think I'd like that.
Silvis wheezed.
But I appreciate the thought.
Back in his corner, Coach Drago was already pulling up footage of Gavron's previous fights on a datapad. Decent warm-up, he said as Winston ducked through the ropes. But the real test comes next. The Jandari is going to be a whole different kind of problem. Winston took a long drink of water, watching as Gavron postured for the crowd. 4 arms, but he's got no style, he said with a slight smile. If he knew how to box, I'd be in trouble, but he's just a bruiser. Valencia looked between them, shaking his head in amazement. I still can't believe this was approved. Hey, you guys came to us, Drago pointed out. You said we gotta prove our strength before the Xenos take us seriously. I know. Valencia shook his head. I still can't believe it. He looked over at the 4-armed warrior Winston would face next. He frowned. Are you sure you can handle that guy? John. Winston turned to face the diplomat fully, his expression serious. You're nervous, I get that. But you need to relax, man. He gestured at the alien crowd. Look at them. They're all watching. They laughed at us when we entered this tournament. Then they ain't laughing no more. These fists are gonna prove that we belong here. He clapped the man on the shoulder. Valencia winced. Trust me, it'll be okay. Before Valencia could respond, a massive shadow fell over their corner. Gavron Bloodbraider had finished his post-night routine and now loomed over them. All 4 arms crossed over his chest. This close, the Jundari's size was even more impressive. It was a 3-meter mass of muscle and aggression.
Brave words, tiny human,
Gavron rumbled. His upper right hand shot out, faster than something that size should have been able to move. But Winston was already sliding back, just enough that the Jundari's clawed finger missed his chest by millimeters. He didn't flinch or break eye contact.
But this is no place for bravado.
Winston raised an eyebrow. You gonna try to eat me too?
I said earlier that I would.
The Jundari loomed over the human. He glared a moment longer, then stomped away.
I'll see you in the ring.
Well, Valencia said after a moment. He seems charming. The arena's containment field hummed to life as Winston and Gavron took their positions. Under the harsh lights, the size difference between them was stark. The Jundari warrior's upper arms alone were thicker than Winston's torso, and his lower set rippled with dense alien muscle.
Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all designations.
Jomi's voice carried a fresh note of excitement.
We've seen the human Winston Johnson defy expectations once today. But now he faces Gavron Bloodbraider, veteran of 17 arena victories. Gavron has lost only 2 matches in his entire career. He's killed everyone else he's ever faced.
The crowd roared. Gavron spread all 4 arms wide, drinking in their energy. By contrast, Winston remained still, hands raised in his standard boxing guard, studying his opponent with calm intensity.
Fight!
Jomi shouted. Gavron launched himself forward with blistering speed. All 4 arms spread to catch Winston in a devastating bear hug. But the human was already moving, his footwork carrying him just outside the Jundari's reach. Winston's overhand right cracked into Gavron's face, snapping the alien's head back. The crowd gasped. Gavron recovered quickly, mandibles clicking in fury. His lower right arm shot out in a hook that would have taken most species' heads off. Winston slipped under it, landing 2 sharp body shots that made the Jundari grunt in surprise.
Incredible!
Jomi's voice rang out.
The human speed is matching Gavron's legendary quickness. This human might be the real deal.
In the diplomatic box, Valencia gripped the railing. Winston's keeping up. He might actually beat that monster.
Better than keeping up.
Coach Drago grunted, watching intently.
Watch Gavron's face. He's never been hit that hard before.
The Jundari warrior was indeed showing signs of confusion. His attacks were becoming wider, more desperate. All 4 arms lashed out in devastating combinations that would have overwhelmed any normal opponent. But Winston moved like water, slipping between the strikes, landing hard counters that did a lot of damage. His right hook slammed into Gavron's ribs, drawing a pained hiss from the alien warrior. The Jundari changed tactics, trying to use his lower arms to cut off Winston's movement while striking with the uppers. It was a technique that had won him many fights, but Winston had trained specifically for it. He stepped inside Gavron's range, too close for the alien's longer arms to generate full power. A series of brutal body shots made Gavron curl inward reflexively. Winston pivoted, slipping between the Jundari's arms, and landed a hook that rocked the alien's head sideways. Purple blood sprayed across the arena floor.
Unbelievable!
Jomi was practically bouncing in his announcer's booth.
The human's fighting style is perfectly countering Gavron's multiple limb advantage. Who is this guy?
The crowd's mood was shifting. They were starting to realize that they were witnessing something special. One of those moments in sports that would be spoken of for decades to come. Gavron felt the change in the atmosphere. He hissed in rage. The Jundari warrior charged forward, all 4 arms struck in swift sequence. The attacks came from multiple angles simultaneously, a storm of strikes that seemed impossible to evade. Winston moved. His footwork was precise, each step calculated through thousands of hours of practice. He slipped between Gavron's upper arms, ducked under a hook from the lower right, and pivoted past a strike from the lower left. The human's fist crashed into the Jundari's solar plexus with the full force of his triple gravity-enhanced muscles. Gavron staggered back, mandibles gasping in shock. Before he could recover, Winston stepped in again. He hit hard and fast, jab, cross, hook, hook, uppercut. Each punch carried the weight of the Earth's gravity multiplied by 3, delivered with the absurd hand speed of a champion boxer.
By the Fort!
Jomi's voice crackled with excitement.
That human's a monster! He is smashing Gavron around like he's made of paper!
Gavron tried to backpedal, to create space for his longer reach, but Winston stayed in close. A particularly savage body shot made the alien double over again. When he instinctively brought his upper arms down to protect himself, Winston's uppercut snapped his head back. The Jundari's response was another charge, but this one was different. Instead of trying to strike, Gavron opened all 4 arms wide. It was a classic Jundari grappling technique. Winston had been waiting for it. As Gavron's arms closed in, Winston dropped his weight and drove forward. His shoulder slammed into the alien's sternum just as those 4 powerful arms would have locked around him. The impact lifted Gavron off his feet, sending him crashing to the arena floor. Winston followed him down, not giving the larger fighter time to recover. His fists became pistons driving into the Jundari's face and body with brutal force and precision. Each strike landed exactly where it would do the most damage, guided by years of study and practice.
Stop.
Gavron's voice was barely recognizable.
I yield.
Winston immediately backed off, hands still raised in case it was a trick. But the Jundari warrior made no attempt to rise. He lay there, all 4 arms splayed out, purple blood pooling beneath him. The arena fell silent. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a cheer went up. It was joined by another, then another, and soon the entire arena was roaring. Winston raised a single fist, letting the cheers wash over him.
Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all configurations!
Jomi's voice shook with emotion.
We have just witnessed history! Winston the Heavy Johnson advances to the semifinals! Maybe these humans aren't so weak after all.
In the competitors' area, Tovor Grom watched with intense interest. The Vangor warrior's armored exoskeleton clicked as he shifted position. He'd expected to face Gavron in the semifinals. Now he would have to rethink his entire strategy. The arena's medical bay hummed with activity as various species received treatment between matches. Winston sat on an examination table, allowing a hovering medical drone to scan him while Coach Drago studied footage of his next opponent. Bruised knuckles, the drone chirped in synthesized standard. Minor stress to shoulder ligaments. Recommended treatment, local regeneration, and 15 minutes rest before next match.
Make it quick,
Winston said, watching as a silvery mist enveloped his hands. The advanced medical technology of the arena could repair in minutes what would take weeks to heal naturally. Across the bay, he could see Gavron receiving more extensive treatment, the Jundari's massive frame dwarfing the medical bed. Valencia paced nearby, his diplomatic demeanor cracking slightly with excitement. The Xenonet is exploding. Footage of your matches is being shared across every major hub in the galaxy. The betting odds have shifted dramatically, and you are now favored to reach the finals.
Finals don't matter if we can't get past Tovor Grom,
Coach Drago growled, turning his datapad so Winston could see.
Watch this footage from his qualifier matches.
The screen showed the Vangor warrior in action. Unlike the brutish Gavron or the swift Civilis, Tovor moved with deliberate precision. His armored exoskeleton gleamed under the arena lights as he systematically dismantled his opponents with textbook efficiency.
And he's from a high-gravity world, too.
Drago continued.
About 2.8 Gs. Not quite what you train at, but that's close enough that your usual strength advantage won't be as significant.
Winston flexed his newly healed hands, studying Tovor's movement patterns.
It's still not fair that he gets powered armor.
It ain't fair,
Drago agreed.
All Vangors are cybernetically enhanced. Some kind of medical necessity or something.
Drago switched to a different clip.
Look at his footwork. He's trained. Some kind of martial art. You see how he maintains his base? He's not looking to be caught off guard like Gavron was.
A deep voice interrupted their analysis.
Your trainer is correct, human.
Tovor Grom stood in the medical bay's entrance, his armored form filling the doorway. Unlike the other aliens Winston had faced, the Vangor's body language was controlled, professional. He moved into the room with measured steps, each movement precisely calculated.
I have studied your matches,
Tovor continued, his translator rendering his voice in crisp, technical tones.
You fight well. Few fighters understand the importance of proper biomechanical analysis in combat.
Winston stood.
You did pretty good yourself.
Indeed. Tovor's external sensor arrays, the Vangor equivalent of eyes, pulsed with a soft blue light.
We are both warriors who have honed our bodies through intelligence as well as will. I look forward to testing myself against you.
Valencia shifted nervously, but Winston smiled. After the posturing of Silvis and the rage of Gavron, Tovor's professional demeanor was almost refreshing.
I feel the same.
A worthy enemy is very much like a friend.
Tovor inclined his head slightly.
Your species is new to the galactic stage, but you understand principles that many older races have forgotten. Perhaps we will speak further when the tournament is done.
Speaking of tournaments, Coach Drago cut in. We got preparation to do. No offense.
None taken.
He turned and walked away, armored feet clicking against the medical bay floor.
Well,
Valencia said after a moment,
he seems more reasonable than the others.
More dangerous, too.
Drago growled.
He's not fighting out of pride or bloodlust. Everything he does has a purpose.
The old trainer turned back to his datapad.
We got 10 minutes before they call the match. Let's break down the defense patterns he was using when backing up.
The arena lights gleamed off Tovor's armored exoskeleton as he and Winston took their positions. The Vangor warrior moved with cybernetic precision, each step calibrated to maintain optimal balance. His armor plates shifted and realigned, compensating for even the smallest change in posture.
This is gonna be a good one, folks,
Jomi said enthusiastically.
Two warriors shaped by the crushing embrace of high-gravity worlds. Tovor Grom, the famous walk-in fortress of Vangor Prime, versus Winston the Heavy Johnson, our surprise up-and-comer.
The crowd's reaction was different this time. Instead of dismissive jeers or bloodthirsty roars, there was an atmosphere of genuine anticipation. Winston had earned their respect, and they knew Tovor's reputation for technical excellence.
Fight!
Jomi announced. Neither fighter rushed in. They circled each other, slowly, each looking for weaknesses in the other's defense. Tovor's sensor arrays pulsed rhythmically as he analyzed Winston's movement patterns. Winston kept his guard high, watching how the Vangor's armor plates shifted with each step. Tovor threw a probing jab, his armored fist cutting through the air with surprising speed. Winston slipped it easily, but didn't counter. The human's eyes narrowed. He'd seen how the Vangor's chest plates had shifted to support the punch.
You are surprisingly cautious,
said Tovor.
Boxing is called the sweet science,
Winston explained, throwing a light jab of his own.
It's a thinking man's martial art.
The Vangor's defense was perfect, deflecting the punch with minimal movement. But Winston had seen something. A slight gap in the armor where shoulder met chest, visible for just a fraction of a second during the deflection.
Look at that,
the technical analyst commented.
The human is matching Tovor's energy efficiency. No wasted motion, no unnecessary expenditure. This is high-gravity combat at its finest.
In the diplomatic box, Valencia leaned forward.
Why aren't they really fighting? They're just touching each other.
They are fighting,
Coach Drago growled.
With their minds as much as their bodies. Watch Winston's eyes. He's building a map of that armor's weak points.
The careful probing continued for another minute. Each fighter threw occasional light strikes, more to observe reactions than to do damage. The crowd was silent, sensing that they were watching something more subtle than the usual arena brutality. Then, in perfect synchronization, both fighters moved. Tovor's right hand shot out in a precise strike aimed at Winston's throat. At the exact same moment, Winston launched a hook targeted at that gap he'd spotted in the Vangor's armor. Both fighters twisted to avoid the other's attack. The timing so perfect, it looked choreographed.
Extraordinary!
Jomi shouted.
Both warriors identified and targeted weaknesses simultaneously. The level of calculation here is unprecedented.
The exchange set off a cascade of technical violence. Tovor pressed down with a series of perfectly structured combinations, his armored fists whistling through the air with mechanical precision. Winston's defense was equally precise, each movement calculated to preserve energy while gathering more data about his opponent's patterns.
Fascinating,
Tovor said as they reset their positions.
You've adapted Earth boxing to account for alien physiology and armor configurations.
Winston's response was a lightning-fast combination aimed at 3 different weak points he identified.
Tovor blocked two, but he had to give ground to avoid the third. The Vangor sensor arrays pulsed with what might have been approval. The careful probing erupted into explosive violence. Winston launched a combination at the gaps he identified in Tovor's armor. Jab toward the neck point, cross aimed at the shoulder seam, hook targeting the waist articulation. Each punch carried the full force of his triple gravity-enhanced muscles, precisely targeted to exploit the Vangor's defensive weaknesses. Tovor's response was equally calculated. His armor plates shifted and locked, transforming his defense into a mobile fortress. He deflected the jab, absorbing the cross on a reinforced plate, and rotated to protect the waist joint from the hook. Every movement was a masterpiece of efficiency, using Winston's own force against him. Winston pressed forward, maintaining pressure while searching for new openings. His fists became a blur, targeting every weak point he could find. Tovor's defense remained impeccable, but the Vangor was being forced to give ground.
Your calculation of force vectors is impressive,
Tovor said, deflecting another combination.
Most opponents either strike too hard and exhaust themselves, or too softly to threaten my armor.
Thanks, Winston replied, slipping under a counter-strike. Your adaptive defense is something else. It's like fighting a learning algorithm.
In essence, it is.
Tovor's sensor arrays pulsed as he launched a series of precise strikes aimed at human nerve clusters.
My armor contains quantum computing matrices that analyze combat data in real time.
Winston bobbed and weaved, avoiding the worst of the assault. Hey, that's actually pretty cool. I bet it has a power consumption problem, though. In the corner, Coach Drago smiled grimly. There it is, just like we thought. He can't maintain that level of adaptation indefinitely. Do you think he can wear down the armor's power supply? Valencia asked, gripping the railing as Winston narrowly avoided a crushing blow. That's been the plan all along, Drago confirmed. Why do you think we spend so much time on energy-efficient movement and training? Winston can maintain this pace for hours. The armor can't. Back in the ring, the battle had evolved into a complex game of resource management. Winston kept up a steady flow of punches, forcing Tovor's armor to constantly adapt and reconfigure. The Vangor responded with precise counters, trying to end the fight before his power reserves depleted. A particularly vicious exchange left both fighters resetting their positions. Winston's chest heaved with controlled breathing, while Tovor's armor plates whirred as they realigned. Both fighters had scored hits. Winston sported a bruise on his ribs, while one of Tovor's shoulder plates showed stress fractures.
Your strategy becomes clear,
Tovor said, sensor arrays flickering.
You intend to exhaust my armor's power supply through sustained assault. Clever. Most opponents focus on overwhelming force instead of systematic depletion.
Seems smarter than trying to punch through it directly. Winston maintained his guard, noting how the Vangor's movements were becoming slightly slower. Although I gotta admit, even running at reduced power, that armor is a pain to deal with.
Indeed?
Tovor's voice carried genuine curiosity, even as he launched another precise combination.
Perhaps after this, we might discuss an exchange of technical data.
Winston slipped the strikes and countered with his own, forcing another energy-expensive adaptation. Sounds good to me. I'll buy you a beer.
A beer?
Tovor's sensor arrays pulsed with what might have been amusement.
A human tradition, I assume?
Yep. Winston frowned. Can your species drink alcohol?
I suppose we'll find out,
Tovor told him.
I think it's time we finished this.
Winston's smile was fierce. Agreed. The Vangor's armor plates locked into a new configuration, one that sacrificed adaptability for pure defensive power. It was an all-or-nothing gambit. If Tovor could weather Winston's assault in this static mode, his remaining power reserves might be enough for a final, decisive counterattack. Winston recognized the gambit for what it was. His lips curved in a slight smile as he settled into his stance. This is what all his preparation had been for. The moment when technical skill, physical power, and tactical thinking would combine to determine the victor. Winston launched himself forward with an explosive force, his entire body becoming a precision weapon. Each punch was calculated to strike the exact same points on Tovor's head and jaw. He wasn't trying to break through, but to transfer force into the brain beneath. By the void! The technical analyst's voice crackled with excitement. The human is trying to jar the opponent's brain! It's a knockout technique! Tovor recognized the danger immediately. His static defense configuration protected his body, but the head was still vulnerable. The Vangor warrior tried to shift his stance to cover himself, but Winston pressed forward relentlessly. Tovor's sensor arrays flashed with urgent patterns as his armor's warning systems activated. He launched a desperate counterattack, trying to disrupt Winston's rhythm. The Vangor strikes were still precisely targeted, still technically perfect, but they lacked the adaptive power that made them so dangerous earlier. Winston slipped the first 2 strikes and blocked the third with his forearm. The impact sent pain shooting through his arm, but he maintained his focus. His right hand shot out into a straight punch that connected Tovor's armored jaw. The armor cracked. It wasn't a catastrophic failure. The Vangor battleplate was too well engineered for that. But the spiderweb of fractures that spread from the impact point told both fighters that the end was near. One more solid hit would shatter the compromised section entirely.
Well fought, human,
Tovor said, his translator somehow conveying both resignation and respect.
It was an effective strategy. You forced me to deplete my power reserves before revealing your true approach.
You almost had me a couple of times, Winston replied, maintaining pressure but giving his opponent the courtesy of a final exchange. That counter-rotation defense in the 3rd minute? Never seen anything like it.
Perhaps.
Tovor's sensor arrays pulsed thoughtfully.
Perhaps this is why your species has advanced so quickly. You do not simply fight. You treat combat as a problem-solving exercise.
No, we treat everything like a problem-solving exercise, Winston said with a slight smile. You ready to finish this? The Vangor warrior straightened to his full height, armor plates grinding as they tried to compensate for the damage.
Indeed, human. Show me the culmination of your calculations.
Winston's response was a combination that they had practiced thousands of times in the triple gravity chamber. Jab to make Tovor raise his guard, cross to force him to rotate the damaged plate, left hook to the body, making him dip slightly to protect his midsection. And, finally, a right uppercut to the Vangor's fractured jaw. The impact rang through the arena like a bell tone. The Vangor warrior staggered, his armor's power core flickering and dying as emergency shutdowns activated to prevent catastrophic feedback.
I yield,
Tovor said simply, dropping to one knee as his unpowered armor locked up.
The victory is yours, Winston Johnson of Earth, and well earned.
The crowd erupted in cheers.
Amazing fight!
Jomi Hype shouted.
Winston the Heavy Johnson advances to the finals, where he'll face defending champion Jagon the Star Crusher. Can humanity's rising star overcome the most dominant fighter in arena history? Looks like we'll find out after a 1-hour recovery period.
As medical drones rushed to assist Tovor, Winston knelt beside his fallen opponent. That was one of the best fights of my life, he said quietly. Thank you. The Vangor sensor arrays flickered with complex patterns.
The honor was mine. But be warned. Jagon fights neither with Gavron's rage nor my precision. Here's something else entirely. Something even my combat prediction matrices struggle to analyze.
I know. Winston stood, already feeling the medical drone's healing mist working on his injuries. We've been saving some tricks for him. In the competitor's area, Jagon watched with cold eyes as Winston helped Tovor to the medical bay. The defending champion's massive frame seemed to radiate menace. His species, the Formug, were notorious even among the Galactic Society's warrior cultures. 1 hour passed. The arena fell silent as Jagon the Star Crusher entered the ring. The defending champion moved with unnatural grace, his massive frame seeming to distort the space around it. The Formag's skin was a deep obsidian that seemed to absorb light, marked with patches that pulsed in bioluminescence with complex patterns.
This is it, fight fans!
Jomi's voice carried a note of genuine awe.
The final match of the tournament! Defending champion Jagon faces Winston the Heavy Johnson, who will be declared strongest of all!
In his corner, Winston listened intently as Coach Drago delivered final instructions.
Everything we've done has led to this. All the training, all the preparation. But Jagon's different from the others. He doesn't fight with muscles. He is psionic.
The stories about the Formag, Valencia muttered. They say this species evolved to read minds and project illusions. Winston nodded, watching as Jagon performed his pre-fight ritual. The champion's movements seemed to leave after images, like reality itself struggled to track his position.
We don't think he's up to reading a human mind on a first meeting, but the illusions? That's gonna suck.
Many have challenged my title.
Jigon's voice resonated on multiple frequencies simultaneously.
All have fallen. Your species is young, human. You have not tasted what power truly is.
Winston stepped into the ring and settled into his stance. Maybe, but we're quick learners. The containment field hummed to life. The crowd held its breath, and Winston took a deep breath as he settled into his stance.
Fight!
Jigon moved, and reality bent. The champion seemed to attack from multiple angles simultaneously, so fast and furious Winston couldn't guess which one was real until the moment of impact. It was like fighting blindfolded after someone slipped him a magic mushroom, but Winston had trained for this. He had spent months in the triple gravity chamber, fighting with an actual blindfold, fighting multiple opponents with holographic illusions, honing his mind and his instincts. He couldn't read every attack, but he had guessed right enough to avoid the worst of it.
How?
Jigon's voice carried genuine surprise.
How are you doing that?
Winston's counterattack was precisely timed, striking not where he could see Jigon, but where he thought Jigon was. His fist connected with shocking force, sending the champion staggering back.
The human!
The technical analyst was practically shouting.
He's seeing through Jigon's projections! He actually hit the champion! I have never seen such a thing!
The fight escalated into something beyond normal combat. Jigon's attacks seemed to bend space itself, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Winston responded with the textbook boxing, executed with inhuman precision, each movement grounded in the fundamental forces he'd internalized through years of training and guided by primitive instinct.
You worthless upstart!
Jigon roared, his bioluminescent patches flaring with alien energies.
I am beyond mere physical combat! I am!
Winston's right cross interrupted the monologue, backed by every newton of force 3 times Earth's gravity could produce. You talk too much, he said calmly. Shut up and fight. The champion was getting desperate. His attacks became wilder, his illusions more elaborate. Winston weathered the assault, maintaining perfect form as he waited for his opportunity. It came in the 7th minute. Jigon fully committed to an all-out assault, coming from the side while his illusory self attacked from the front. Winston saw the pattern. He knew where his enemy would be. His uppercut met Jigon at the exact moment the Formag stepped in to strike. The impact was magnificent. It lifted Jigon clean off the mat. The champion's illusions flickered and died as he crashed to the arena floor. Silence fell. Jigon the Star Crusher lay motionless. And then, the crowd exploded. The cheering was deafening, spanning the entire range of alien vocalizations. They had witnessed a fighter using basic physics and pattern recognition to overcome supernatural abilities. It was like nothing they'd ever seen.
Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all configurations.
Jomi's voice shook with emotion.
We have a new champion.
For the first time, the announcer addressed the human directly.
Winston the Heavy Johnson, you have shown yourself to be the strongest of all. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Just one thing,
said the champion. He waved his hand, grinning.
Hi, Mom.